All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Essential Essence to 20. Join me as we look at the power, perks, features, and focuses of the Essence 20 system. And in this particular sub-series, we're going to be looking at the Power Rangers RPG. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. Now, let's talk about this. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Blue Ranger. Now, anyone that's been watching this channel for a little while knows that I am not particularly fond of the Renegade team deciding to tie their role to Spectrum colors, so I've actually come up with alternate names for each of the roles, just so that you can have, like, a Blue Ranger that's not a Blue Ranger. This particular Ranger I call the Technician. And we will figure that out real quick when we are looking it over. But the Blue Ranger in general, again, has an interesting history throughout Power Rangers. The Blue Ranger tends to very often be the second in command of the team when a Black Ranger is not there. And sometimes when a Black Ranger is there. So they tend to be one of the more stoic characters. And when we look at the Power Rangers version as compared to the Super Sentai, the Power Rangers, Blue Rangers, tend to all have an affinity for smarts, science, technology, and things like that. Also, if you watched my recent Beneath the Helmet review. Another thing that's unique about the Blue Ranger is, in the case where there is a female Blue Ranger versus a male Blue Ranger, they actually wear different colors. Male Blue Rangers in general are going to have just kind of a classic dark blue color, whereas female Blue Rangers in general are going to have a sky blue or aqua color. And you can see this with Tori from Ninja Steel. I can't remember her name off the top of my head right now, but the Blue Mystic Force Ranger also has a lighter blue color. It's interesting. I'm not sure 100% the relevance of it, but I've always found it very interesting that is the way that they decide to do that. And it's not really done with any other color. Every other color, if you have the difference between a male and a female version of the color is whether or not they're wearing a skirt for the most part. So, that being said, let's talk about the actual specifics of the Blue Ranger themselves. The things that you want to look at when you're looking at the roles is first, what are the essence scores that are going to be the most useful to each role. And they generally tend to be the ones that are going to get the most boosts throughout the life of the character. For the Blue Ranger, Smarts is going to be their highest essence score by a pretty large margin. And when you're looking at what you can do with Smarts in general, it does feed into the fantasy of the Blue Ranger, where they're just an incredibly intelligent style character. So the skills that are smart based are alertness, culture, science, survival, and technology. So for the most part, the thing that the Blue Ranger is going to be the best at is going to be the things that get you information. And I've talked about this in a few of my various series on this channel. I think a lot of people undervalue the value of knowledge in a tabletop RPG. Being able to figure out things like what defense score is their highest and what is their lowest? Do they have any special attacks that you want to be wary of? Do they have any weaknesses or anything like that? Or even something as simple as being able to know a fight is coming before it comes. So things like for alertness, specializing in perception for alertness can be really, really useful in preventing your ranger team from being ambushed, which, if you've ever watched Power Rangers, is an extremely common tactic for literally every villain. You'll have the Power Rangers doing something on their own. Maybe they're working out, maybe they're just having a picnic in the park, and then suddenly, oh, putties! Yeah, guys, it's morphin' time! Always happens, over and over and over again. A solid Blue Ranger is going to be able to negate things like that and possibly even allow their team to ambush the enemies every so often. And then other things, you know, culture has so many different things you can use it, like some of the sample specializations like psychology, history, so useful things like that. Science is going to be the one that everyone thinks about with the Blue Ranger. Survival is another one that can be really, really useful depending on the style of Power Rangers campaign you're running. If you're doing something like Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, where they send Jason and Kat into the wilds of Africa, if I remember correctly, to find Larigo, someone with a lot of survival training would be very, very useful in that particular situation. And again, depending on your campaign, survival might be really, really good. And then technology is the one that is the most interesting, because in the Essence20 system, your attack rolls in general are going to either be might for strength-based ones, or finesse for speed-based attacks, and those are melee attacks. And then your ranged attacks are almost exclusively, your ranged attacks are almost exclusively going to be targeting, which is another speed skill. However, there are certain weapons in the Essence20 system that actually use technology to fire. They generally tend to be computerized weapons. And so, specifically for Blue Rangers, the idea of, building their own weapons and building their own things means that there's probably a pretty good idea that your Blue Ranger is going to have access to at least one technology-based weapon. So for the vast majority of Rangers, your smart skills are going to be mostly about getting information. But for a Blue Ranger in particular, there's a possibility that their smart skill might turn into their attack skill as well, which can be very, very useful. The second highest skill that they're going to have is going to be speed, which again is going to be useful just in general for rangers. Speed, again, if you want a ranged ranger, speed is going to be very, very useful for the targeting skill. If you want a melee-based ranger, speed is still going to be useful because you can use finesse weapons for it. And then also your speed essence score is going to dictate how many free actions you get. In the Essence20 system, free actions aren't free. It's one of my biggest gripes with the system. But having a high speed score gives you a lot more the things you can do on your turn. And as we saw with the Black Ranger, there is actually skills built into the role that required a free action. So understanding the role really well and understanding where and when to use your free actions, whether you want to use them for additional movement, whether you want to use them to aim, to give you upshifts on your targeting attacks, all of those things are going to be very useful. The next one that Blue Rangers get is social, or not next, but the next highest is going to be social, followed by strength being the one that they get the least number of increases in. So the Blue Ranger role in general is not meant to be an extremely strong role, which also can translate to them having kind of low hit points, because additional hit points are acquired through the conditioning skill of strength. So this is definitely a ranger that you want to be smart about. You want to be sure that you are positioning them in the right place to where they're not taking a ton of attacks, because they're not going to have the hit point pool of something like a Black Ranger. In addition to that, different roles have different amounts of personal power. Personal power is kind of the generic limited resources that all Rangers have access to. And depending on your role, you may have quite a few different things in the role that use personal power. You may have next to nothing in the role that use personal power. But the thing that is going to get you spending personal power significantly more often is your grid powers. Starting at level 6, you are able to start picking grid powers. And they're one of the things that really helps you to kind of customize your class, your role in the Essence20, specifically in the Power Rangers Essence20 system, because there are no subclasses or anything for any of the roles. It is designed to be a much more kind of skill-based system compared to the other ones where you will pick a role and then a focus, and that really is going to help define how you play your character. The Blue Ranger in particular actually has relatively high personal power. They start at 2, like every other Ranger, but by the time they get to level 20, they have access to up to 14 personal power. And one thing I think I might have misstated in my previous Essential Essence to the 20 video, personal power regeneration is not, you don't get your full amount of personal power every day. You have a specific amount, and for the Blue Ranger, you regenerate 4 personal power per day. So at low levels, that's effectively all of your personal power. But as you get to higher levels, you're starting to get less and less and less of your total personal power back every single day. So doing things like spending story points to get the team more personal power, or using particular role perks or other perks that just give you more personal power can be very, very useful depending on how you build your character. And then the final thing, the training, they're trained in light and medium armor, which for Power Rangers is effectively when you morph, which bonus to your toughness score are you going to use. In general, you're not equipping different sets of armor as a Power Ranger, though theoretically there are ways that you can do that. It really doesn't work that well in Power Rangers. In other systems like the G.I. Joe RPG, your armor is a really, really big deal. But Power Rangers, it's effectively, if you have medium armor training, then that means that when you morph, your toughness goes up by 2 instead of 1. And there's really no reason to ever use the quote-unquote light armor, because medium is just a bigger number, with a few very, very rare exceptions. So that's the overall overview of the Blue Ranger role. They do have, again, what I call the table features or table perks. We will discuss that when we get to the specific abilities. But anyway, so yeah, that's the basic overview. Moving on, and I need a drink. Gotta have my water. All right, moving on. At first level, you get, it's morphin' time! And I've described its morphing time already. It's in my Black Ranger roll of a video. And I do timestamp all of these by the particular ability as opposed to levels like I used to do in D&D Deep Dive. So if you want to know more specifics about how its morphing time works, you can check out that video. You can go right to that, to the timestamp. But for the most part, your toughness increased, your jump distance is increased, and you can summon power-based weapons as a free action. And if you're reduced to 0, you can choose to demorph instead of being taken out of combat entirely. So yeah, that's its morphing time. Moving on to Eureka! Now, Eureka is the table perk for the Blue Ranger role. And What it is the Blue Ranger has a limited number of what's called idea points. That is their limited resource. And the main way you use your idea points is by using this Eureka thing, which is really simple. At any point when you are about to make a skill check with a smart skill, you may spend an idea point to gain an edge on that roll. Very simple, very basic, and it can be a little bit misleading if you don't quite understand the breadth of smarts-based skills. Again, one of the reasons why I focus so much during the overview on things that smarts can do is this Eureka thing is going to give you an edge on that. And something that I just realized as I was doing research for this, in D&D 5th edition, the advantage-disadvantage system is effectively what the edge snag system is in the Essence20. But in 5th edition, if you have multiple sources of edge, or multiple sources of advantage, nothing happens. You either have advantage, disadvantage, or neutral. And so if you have like 3 things giving you advantage and 1 thing giving you disadvantage, you just do a flat roll because they don't stack. In the Essence20 system, if you get an additional edge on a roll, that actually gives you a special upshift on that roll. So with the Eureka skill, even if you already have advantage on something, if you burn an idea point to give you, or edge on something, if you burn an idea point to give you an additional edge, you can basically upshift that skill for the cost of one of these idea points. Which isn't a bad thing. And as I mentioned before, most smart skills are going to be information gathering, which are still very useful. But if you eventually do start getting, technology-based weapons, this can be a really essential thing for making sure that you hit your targets and get really good rolls when you do hit your targets. So yeah. For the Blue Ranger, understanding when the best time to use these Eureka points is going to be an important aspect of playing the character. Again, the fantasy of the Blue Ranger is this incredibly smart character that tends to be prepared for a lot of different situations. And so by using your idea points to get your Eureka at certain times, you are going to be able to ensure that the rest of your team is going to be able to react as well as physically possible to the various situations that they are put into. So yeah, always understand that Eureka is a single character focused skill. It's a self-focused skill, so it's not like you can give it out like the Black Ranger had the ability to kind of give out bonuses. Eureka is really focused on the Blue Ranger and basically helping the Blue Ranger succeed where the Blue Ranger would normally succeed. Again, if you watch Power Rangers, there's a lot of times where the Blue Ranger will have that Eureka moment that changes everything for the team. They're fighting a tough monster, they got defeated by it once, the Blue Ranger will work with Alpha and they'll go, wait a minute, we've just figured out if we do this and this and this, then we can do this. The Blue Ranger was essential in helping to create a lot of the technology that the Power Rangers used in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So having that focus and understanding that when it really counts, you can give yourself that edge can be very, very useful. So yeah, moving on. The next ability at 2nd level, you get Helping Hand. As a free action, you may spend a personal power to heal any morphed member of a Power Rangers team within a certain distance 1 health. This is really, really useful, and it kind of goes to explain why the Blue Ranger role has such, first of all, a high personal power regeneration, and a high personal power capacity. This is a ranger. This is a role that is designed to use your personal power a lot. Which also means that when you are looking at your grid perks, you're going to want to kind of look and go, hey, which grid perks can help me to use my significantly larger personal power capacity than anyone else? And Helping Hand is going to be your first way to burn personal power. Now, if we remember back to the Black Ranger role, they didn't get a way to use their personal power until minimum level 6 when they get their grid perk feature. This one, right at second level, you already have a way to start using your personal power. And it's a remarkably useful one. Again, compared to other systems, the Power Rangers RPG and Essence20 in general has a very low hit point threshold. Most characters start with between 2 and 4 hit points. And even really high characters are generally not going to have more than maybe 10 or 12 of hit points total. It is not a super high hit point game, so a single hit point can be very, very useful. Especially if you're looking at something like, again, when you're reduced to 0 health, either you're defeated, meaning you are taken out of the combat scene, you cannot do anything anymore, or you return to your natural form unconscious and at 1 health. So if you have a character that is getting dangerously close to that 0 hit point threshold, and they might lose their morphing ability, which really can affect the entire team, depending on which ranger it is. Going over and being able to basically heal at range as a free action can be very, very useful. And the skill itself does not have a limitation or anything. It's not like once per turn or once per character or something. Basically, as many free actions as you have, you can basically turn those free actions directly into health. So while, yeah, it is still not the greatest conversion rate of 1 personal power equals 1 health, it still means that if you've got 2 or 3 free actions in a turn, you can go, hey, I'm going to give you 3 health right now, and then I'm going to go do the rest of the stuff that I normally do with my standard action and my move. So yeah, again, understanding where that health is going to be most useful and having enough free actions to use it are going to be important. And again, because speed is basically the second highest essence score for this character, there's a good chance that even at level 2, when you first get this, you might already have 2 or maybe even 3 free actions to be able to use this to your advantage. So, yeah. Moving on. The next ability is Grid Tech. Grid Tech is really, really interesting. There are 4 levels of Grid Tech, so effectively at second level, you get your first Grid Tech. And then at various levels, as you level up, you will get access to more Grid Tech. And what that translates to is each level of Grid Tech has 4 different possible things you can do with it, and you get to pick 2. I've mentioned this before in my D&D Deep Dive series. Whenever you are effectively giving what I call a menu board to players, sorry, it's up on my glasses. Go away. There we go. Whenever you give what I refer to as a menu board to players, you need to make sure that there are enough choices on there that the choices still feel meaningful. For example, if you have a class where like every 4 levels you get to choose one of like 7 different abilities, that's really cool. It means you can kind of customize your character and do really cool things with it. However, if those 7 things over the lifetime of your character, you're actually able to get 6 of them, then effectively what that turns into is you choose the most useful one at the lowest level, and then each time you level up, you choose a significantly less useful skill. So it's effectively discouraging you from leveling up, simply because as you get higher levels, you get less useful things. So I guess not really discouraging you from leveling up, but it's just not very fun. So this is effectively a menu board for the thing, and my basic rule of thumb is you should bare minimum have double the number of choices available than the character can ever to take. And that means that you are never just taking, okay, well, this is the least bad one, so that's the one that I'm going to take. So with grid tech, you can take 2 from each level, and there's a grand total of 4. So it does follow that. However, in order for that to be really useful, all 4 of them need to be something that is useful. Like if you give someone 4 choices, but only 2 of them are really useful, you're not really giving them choices. You're giving them right answers. My mantra for game design: good game design gives you choices, bad game design gives you right answers. The illusion of choice. So with grid tech, starting at 2nd level, you get grid tech 1. And the 4 different things you can get for grid tech 1 are aptitude augmenter, grid speak receivers, grid speak transmitters, and blaster focusers. And this is where I start having issues with the grid tech system, and this is where you might want to maybe homebrew something a little more interesting. The first one, aptitude augmenter, is actually really useful. Pick a skill in which you have at least 1 level. You may reroll 1s and 2s when using that skill. This grid tech may be chosen multiple times. So as much as technically grid tech 1 only has 4 choices, one of them you can choose multiple times, and it's a banger. Basically, as long as you've invested at least 1 level in a skill, you can get this aptitude augmenter added to it, and then you re-roll 1s and 2s while using that skill. Now, I actually went to check if there was any errata for this, because the wording of this is really, really powerful. It says you may re-roll 1s and 2s while using that skill. It doesn't say you may re-roll 1s and 2s once per roll, or you may re-roll 1s and 2s and have to use the second roll. So effectively, with the way that it is written here, this makes you immune to natural 1s and 2s when using that skill. You basically cannot fumble a roll with aptitude augmenter. And this specifically, it doesn't say you may reroll 1s and 2s on your skill dice. It says you may reroll 1s and 2s while using that skill. So that applies to the D20 roll as well. That's a really, really big deal. Especially with, and I think something that people might overlook. The idea of aptitude augmenter when you are either using a skill that you have a specialization in, or you are using a skill that only uses a D4. What that means is you can re-roll half the results of that die, meaning the only thing you can ever get from a D4 skill is either a 3 or a 4. And the way that you get a crit in the Essence20 system is you roll the highest number possible on your skill die. And if you're rolling with specialization, it can be any one of the skill dice that you are rolling. You don't even have to use that particular skill die as your total, just as long as one of them gets the highest number possible. The only limitation to that is if you have a D2, that doesn't count. So it has to be a minimum of a D4. So with Aptitude Augmenter, you can effectively kind of farm critical hits with it if you, again, either make sure that Aptitude Augmenter is used on a skill that you have specialization in, or you specifically use it on a skill that you only have a D4 in. As the dice gets bigger, it's still a useful ability, but it's not quite as guaranteed. You basically have, with Aptitude Augmenter, you have a 50% chance of rolling a crit anytime you roll a D4 for your skill dice. That is massive. Generally, in most RPGs, your critical hit chance is 5%. This is an order of magnitude increase. So, if you feel that is a little bit overpowered, which it kind of is, you may want to add the text to it of you may reroll 1s and 2s while using the skill. You have to use the second result, which is how most other RPGs deal with this to prevent people from effectively milking and being immune from rolling critical failures. But if you're going rules as written, that is how the rule is written. And that means by far it is the most powerful grid tech you can have. You are immune to natural ones on certain skills. And you can take it twice. So, and the other thing with this is as you get to Grid Tech 2 and Grid Tech 3, you theoretically can take lower grid techs. So if you want all of your grid tech to just be aptitude augmenter, you could create a very kind of broken character that's effectively immune to natural ones by just constantly taking aptitude augmenter and putting it on various skills that you use a lot. For a level 2 character, depending on which weapon you are using to fight with, most often, if you're using your Blade Blaster a lot, or if you are using your power weapon a lot and what power weapon it is, you might want to use Aptitude Augmenter on the skill that you use for your attack rolls, because that would effectively mean that you can't critically miss any of your attacks. And, again, if you have a D4 in there, you can kind of milk it for critical hits. So that is just the first grid tech. From this point on, it gets significantly less broken. Gridspeak Receiver, you and your Power Rangers team, when morphed, can understand and read any language used by creatures on the morphing grid. Basically, this is I understand all language. Gridspeak Transmitter is you can speak all languages. And those in and of themselves, I've mentioned this before in just diatribes on RPGs in general. Depending on your game master and the particular campaign that you're in, different languages can be unbelievably useful or completely pointless. Again, if you look at Power Rangers throughout its 35 year history, something like that, everybody speaks English for the most part. Every so often you might have a season where you have a character that is bilingual and might have a conversation with another character in a non-English language. But for the most part, everybody speaks the same language. And even in the US, where Power Rangers is based, for the most part, if you can speak English and Spanish in the US, you can understand probably like 90%, maybe even 95% of people here, because it's becoming increasingly less common for people to not bare minimum speak either English or Spanish. Is my understanding is Spanish is the second most spoken primary and secondary language in the country. So while yes, it was something that I used to experience in retail, there are quite a few different people that won't speak English, but in the U.S., but the vast majority of them outside of like big cities with international airports are going to be speaking Spanish. So the usefulness of Gridspeak receivers and Gridspeak transmitters, again, depending on your campaign, it might be a completely wasted ability, because it doesn't matter if you can understand all languages if everyone's only speaking one language. Now, if you're doing something like using the Across the Stars source book to kind of go to different planets where they might speak completely alien languages that don't exist on Earth, and there's no possible way that your Ranger team could know those languages, that could be an extremely useful ability. Or if you are doing a Power Rangers campaign where it's kind of mythology based, and maybe your characters are a little bit more kind of explorer, Lara Croft style rangers where you're constantly exploring tombs and stuff like that, the ability to understand and read any language could be extremely useful. Or, you have a more kind of or a more fantasy kind of campaign, and there are ancient texts, things like Mystic Force or ancient spells and stuff. The ability to just read any spell book could be very, very useful to you. Or you could be Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and they never experienced a single character that didn't speak English, and they didn't find a single thing that wasn't written in English. And then these abilities are completely useless. And so this is where you really have to have a conversation with your game master. And if you do want to have that really interesting character where they are kind of the know-it-all, the interesting thing about grid speak receivers and grid speak transmitters is it's not just, okay, you have this ability, it is your entire team. And you do see this throughout the rest of grid tech, is a lot of your grid tech abilities are going to affect your entire team. Which, again, very, very useful, but it can make you feel a little bit less special. Yes, they're getting it because of the decisions that you made, but you don't have to give them that ability. You just make a decision at character at level up, and then everybody benefits from your particular decision. So the Blue Ranger role, if you can be a little bit more selfless, it can be very useful. But definitely speak with your game master. Because if you want to deal with stuff like this, the game master is going to have to lean into that. Create situations where there are people that don't speak English for whatever reason, whether they are immigrants to that particular area, whether they are aliens from another planet, whether you're dealing with ancient texts and dead languages, stuff like that. All of those things can definitely come up in Power Rangers. Or if your Power Rangers team is not based in a single city, if you are a global Power Rangers to the team where you're being sent off to other countries, the likelihood of everybody in China, let's say, speaking English is relatively low. English is the #1 language spoken throughout all of the world. But in a world of 7 billion people, I think there's something like a billion people, 1.5 billion people that speak English as either a primary or a secondary language. It might be up to like 2 or 3 billion, but it still means half the world doesn't speak English. So yeah, this is one where you really have to understand the campaign that you're running and talk to the GM. If it starts off that the campaign is really not going to be using languages, you go, I have this thing that I get at level 2 and I really want to use it, then your GM can start adjusting things. There's never a legitimate reason why an NPC in any campaign can't speak a non-English or a non-common, if you're using the kind of fantasy trope language. Like, again, even in countries that are very, very homogenous, there are still variations among languages, and there's always tourism, emigration, immigration, things like that. So the idea of like, well, it doesn't make sense. My campaign is based in Chicago, and everybody in Chicago speaks English. First of all, no, they don't. Second of all, Chicago has the busiest airport, aside from maybe LAX, in the country. I worked in Milwaukee. I worked in North Milwaukee for around a year. And while I was there, because Milwaukee has General Mitchell International Airport, it's a smaller international airport. I'm going to take a drink. Okay. It's a smaller international airport, but it still meant that we got people from all over the world that would show up in Milwaukee. I literally sold a computer in French once. Only happened once. But I literally am like, I go, hi, my name is Jody. What can I help you with? He goes, je suis très désolé, je ne parle pas anglais. I go, oh, Pas de problème. Je parle français. Je ne parle français pas très bien, mais je voudrais aider. Donc, est-ce que vous voudrez? And I sold an entire computer in French. It was not a great sale because I had forgotten, at that point, I'd forgotten more French than I knew. But it was a good experience. So, anyway, languages. Talk to your game master. You may want to avoid both of these things. And we'll find out a little bit later they become significantly less useful as it goes on. But the final one, Blaster Focuses. You add an upshift to all the Blade Blaster attacks of your Power Rangers team. So this is another one where, again, it helps the entire team, and it's actually going to influence how they work. Different Power Rangers teams use their power weapons more often than other ones. The original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, once they got their power weapons, they were pulling them out all the time. Like they were always using their power weapons. And while yes, they did have their blade blasters and they would use them in the beginning, really? They would use them in the beginning of the fights. A lot of times they would pull out their power weapons and use those almost exclusively. When you get something like Blaster Focusers, that incentivizes your players to use their kind of generic sidearms, which again, depending on the team, might be really big. If you look at something like SPD, where they're basically kind of mimicking a police force, they use their sidearms a lot, to the point where the Red Ranger, their kind of special ability is they have a second sidearm. And they kind of dual wield them and do cool stuff. So this is going to highly incentivize using your blade blasters or your sidearms in general. This is another one where you may need to homebrew it, because it's possible that your team might not use specifically blade blasters. But effectively, this is designed to be almost every single Ranger team has a ranged sidearm. If you look at like the In-Space Rangers, they actually had this ability to attach their power weapons to their sidearms to be able to do that. And all of their sidearms could split into a pair of sidearms, which was really interesting. So this is just a thing that, it will incentivize your team to use your blasters more often, which can be fun, might not be, who knows. So yeah, Grid Tech 2, and you guys will notice that every so often I'll just say, and you get them at this point, or you can heal any morph member of a Power Rangers team within a certain distance. I'm specifically leaving out key details as a way to prevent people from using my videos to basically avoid buying the books. Go pick up these books. They're really nice. The Power Rangers core book is a little bit rough. It was the first Essence20 book that they released, but it's still a good system. It's still a system that I really, really enjoy. So go out and pick up the books. That being said, for Grid Tech 2, the four abilities you have to choose from are Defensive Shields, Enhanced Summoner, Power Focusers, and Vision Focusers. So Defensive Shields, you can increase the morph toughness of one member of your Power Rangers team by 1, and it can be chosen once per team member. So this is basically, you're just reinforcing your Ranger suits. And at the default level, that means you can reinforce 2 different character suits, which again can be very, very useful. If you have a Black Ranger who has built their Black Ranger to be that big, tough tank type character, using Defensive Shields on them can be very useful. Increase their toughness so that they can, be that much more difficult to hit. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a character that just does not have good defenses at all, they've spent them a lot of their points either focusing on attack or maybe focusing on social or smarts and not really having a whole lot of combat prowess. Giving defensive shields can be a way to kind of augment that to help them make up for a low strength score specifically. So yeah, enhanced summoners, you and your ranger team reduce the number of rounds it takes to summon your Zords by 1. A lot of people don't realize this. Summoning your Zords normally takes, I believe it's 3 rounds, before I say the wrong thing. Zords. I'd have to look at the. I don't have the Zord rules here, but if I remember correctly, it takes effectively 3 rounds for your Zords to show up after you have called them. And in those 3 rounds, you have to figure out what you're going to do while there's a giant monster in front of you. So Enhanced Summoner just makes it easier and faster for you to get yours as Zords, which is nice. And the Power Rangers RPG, just Power Rangers in general, Zords are a really, really big deal. Your 3rd level ability is exclusively tied to your Zord. So that can be very, very useful. Power Focusers, you get an upshift to all of the power weapon attacks of your Power Rangers team. Again, this is another one where you can incentivize your team to use their power weapons more often. If you take both Blaster Focusers and Power Focusers, it effectively means that whatever weapon you are using, you are going to get an upshift to it. So again, if you want to be that more kind of buff-focused Blue Ranger, where you're taking abilities that are going to help the entire team, Power Focuser and Blaster Focusers can be very, very useful. And again, the thing that is most useful when you're dealing with upshifts is any skill that is specialized. Because if you upshift a specialized skill, you are still rolling the normal die for it. You are just also rolling the die higher for it. And again, in the idea of getting critical hits in the Essence20 system, when you're specialized, the more dice you roll, the better a chance you have of getting a critical success. So Power Focuser and Blaster Focuser can be extremely effective if you have, Rangers that have specialized in the targeting skill, specifically with Blade Blasters or energy-based attacks or something like that. That can be very, very useful. And then Power Focuser, the same thing. You know, if they're specialized in, let's say, martial arts weaponry, with most of the power weapons are going to be, at least melee power weapons are going to have the martial arts aspect on it. Or trait, that's the word I was looking for. So yeah, understanding the rest of your team is very useful. And then the final one, Vision Focuser, is you add 30 feet to the enhanced vision of you and your Power Rangers team while morphed, and this grid tech may be chosen twice. I have looked through here a little bit, and I have not been able to figure out exactly what enhanced vision is talking about. Because I looked in it's morphin time, and it doesn't say anything about having advanced vision in there. I'm assuming it's explained somewhere. But effectively, if I was to translate this to like D&D terms, this is effectively adding dark vision or extending your dark vision is what I would guess it is. Which again, certain situations are very, very useful, and other situations are less useful. So talk with your game master if this is something that you want to do. And again, this is a whole party thing. So that's one of the pitfalls of the Blue Ranger role in general, is because grid tech is such a large part of the role, and so many grid tech abilities are, I'm improving the whole team, you can feel a little bit less special because your decisions help everybody instead of just you. And there's nothing in the grid tech abilities that say that you have to be with them when they're on something to be able to get these grid tech benefits. These are just permanent upgrades to the team. So even if your character is off doing something else, which happened a lot with like Billy, the rest of the Rangers go off while Billy was still busy, futzing with his newest invention that they're going to use to take out the newest monster of the week. They still get all these things. So again, being a little selfless, good thing for a Blue Ranger. Grid Tech 3, again, 4 different things. Aim Apparatus, Morphing Grid Map Suit, Survival Node, and X-Tech Visor. Apparatus. One member of your Power Rangers team gains a level in the targeting skill, and it can be chosen multiple times, once per team member. So this is literally just you get to improve the targeting skill of someone, and it can be you. And again, depending on the weapon that you're using, something like the traditional Pink Ranger, their weapon is a bow. And so having a booster targeting skill means your Blade Blaster attacks your range Blade Blaster attacks are going to have an upshift to them, are going to be easier because you've increased the targeting skill. Your bow attacks are going to increase the targeting skill. If you go with the kind of traditional Black Ranger, they could turn their axe into a cannon, which still uses the targeting skill. Basically, any ranged attack can be improved with that. And if your particular character uses a lot of ranged attacks, using this for you can be very useful. But at the exact same time, if you just have another character that really specializes in ranged attacks, using this on them can be just as effective. But again, you have to be a little bit selfless with being the Blue Ranger. Understand where your grid tech is going to be the most useful. Morphing Grid Map Suit is probably the most simple and yet the most useful in very particular circumstances. Morphing Grid Map Suit, you are always aware of your local position in the morphing grid. You effectively always know where you are. You can't get lost. So again, depending on your campaign, if your campaign is, set in Angel Grove, and you never really leave Angel Grove, Morphing Grid Map Suit is next to useless because it's the city you live in. It's remarkably difficult to get lost in the city that you live in. I'm not saying it's impossible. Angel Grove is effectively Power Rangers LA. LA is a real big city, and you can get lost there. Or something like New York, Chicago, even Milwaukee. I've gotten lost in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee's not Milwaukee, just Milwaukee, not the greater Milwaukee area. Milwaukee's a big city. So if your characters are all in a big city, yeah, you theoretically might get lost every once in a while. But where Morphing Grid Map Soup is going to be the most useful is when, again, if you have an exploration-based team, like, again, if you have your archaeologist style Power Rangers, kind of like Dino Charge, or your Space Rangers, where you're going off exploring new places. Lost Galaxy kind of had that exploration type feel, despite the fact that they were all based on TerraVenture. They did every so often send out people to explore local planets and that, because they were in the Lost Galaxy. So again, this is another one where you really need to talk to your game master. And again, even if up until that point there hadn't been a whole lot of use for it, your game master can start adding new aspects to give you guys the ability to have that useful. Survival node is interesting. Pick one skill that you have no levels in. You gain that skill, but only at a special D2 level that cannot be increased further without buying the D2 level. Normally, this grid tech may be chosen multiple times. This is effectively an anti-snag ability. If you attempt to roll a skill check in a skill that you have no points invested in it, you roll only your D20, but you always roll it with a snag. So something that I've seen pretty often, if you lowball your speed essence and you just don't invest in the initiative score, in your initiative score at all, that means that every time you're rolling initiative with snag, which means you're almost always going to be going low or last in initiative. Now, that might be what you want to do if you're playing a more healer or support type of role. Being able to see what everyone else has done first before you make your decision can be very, very useful. But in that same realm, it can be just as useful to be able to buff your allies before anything happens than waiting for something to happen and reacting to it. So something like Survival Node, you can take that, put that in initiative, and now you never roll a snag on it. But also Survival Node, if you ever invest in that skill, the Survival Node grid tech has been basically deleted. And this doesn't say that, well, if it becomes, if you ever do that, you get this point back and you can choose another one. It would basically mean your grid tech was not used anymore. So this is another one that has very, very limited usefulness, and it's really only useful for that one skill that you just never really use, but you're tired of the few times that you do use it. Or it's a skill that you just don't want to invest the points in, but it gets used often enough that you're like, damn it. Good example, for speed-based skills, infiltration. If your ranger team is trying to be snake, waiting and having to roll infiltration checks when you've never invested anything can not only hurt you, but it can hurt the rest of the team because you roll low enough and you get the whole team discovered. So again, survival node is one of those things that there are certain situations where it's absolutely essential, and then a lot of other situations where it's a completely wasted skill. So again, be careful if you're choosing survival node, and the best thing you can do is choose a skill that you really don't want to put any points into, but when it does get rolled, you don't want to roll a snag. That's really all survival node is for. And then the last one, X-Tech Visor. You can see through solid objects to a certain distance. When doing so, however, you cannot see color or details, just outlines and densities of shapes and objects. Again, another thing that in certain situations could be extremely useful, but for like the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they've never needed to be able to X-ray anything. They've never been in a situation where seeing through a wall was going to give them some real big benefit. So this is another one that's highly campaign specific. Finally, Grid Tech 4. You have again 4 choices: Energic Shields, Grid Speak Translator, Megaform Expediter, and Zeotech Augment. So Energic Shields, pick one type of non-physical, blunt or sharp, damage. While Morph, you gained +3 toughness to that type of damage. So I don't really know why they call it Energic Shields when it's strictly physical damage. But again, this is one that's actually exclusive to you as opposed to the rest of your team. It's just while morphed, you gain. And again, it can be very, very useful depending on the creatures that you're dealing with. You know, your kind of generic minion creatures, most of them are going to be using some kind of physical attack. You know, putties used a lot of blunt attacks. The same with like cogs. So understanding the attacks that you take the most often, that can be very, very useful. And again, a +3 to your toughness is nothing to shake a stick at. That's a significant increase. The next one, Grid Speak Translator. You and your Power Rangers team, when morphed, can speak, understand, read, and write all language used by creatures on the morphing grid. Effectively, Grid Speak Translator replaces both Grid Speak Receiver and Grid Speak Transmitter. So if you were to take this ability and you had taken either of those or both of those as your Grid Tech 1, your Grid Tech 1 choice is now completely useless. And again, there's nothing in here that says if something replaces it, then you can choose a different one. That would be something that I would homebrew in, is like, well, if you pick Grid Speak Translator, you can basically use it to upgrade that, and then you can go back and choose either Aptitude Augmenter twice or Blaster Focusers, just so it doesn't feel like you're kind of punishing them for leveling up here. Megaform Expediter, it takes your Zords 1d4 rounds less time to be ready to take part in the formation of any combined transformation, minimum 1. So again, this is another one that just makes it quicker, because calling your Zords takes time, and then getting them to the point where they can join in their Megaform takes time. So this is just another thing that if you are using your Zords a lot, this can be very, very useful. And then Zeotech Augment. You and your Power Rangers team can collectively choose either your Blade Blasters or your Power Weapons, getting an upshift in any attack that uses them. So this is, again, basically the upgraded version of Blaster Focus and Power Focus. The difference being, if you have Blaster Focusers and Zeotech Augment, there's nothing in here that says that they don't stack. So you go from having an Upshift 1 to an Upshift 2. And you just have to choose either Blade Blasters or Power Weapons. And as a note, it doesn't say that you can choose any of these more than once. This is the first Grid Tech level where you can't choose any of the abilities more than once. So this does turn into, okay, which ones do we use more often? Because this is a relatively high level of ability, by the time you have reached the level that you get Grid Tech 4, you're going to know the things that you guys use the most often. So this is it should be a pretty easy choice of whether you want to use Blade Blasters or Power Weapons to do that. So, yeah, so that is Grid Tech and all 4 levels of it. Moving on. The next things that you get are all generic things that all Rangers get. So we'll just kind of talk about them very quickly, but there's not a whole lot I can say about them. 3rd level, you get your Zords, your Zord features. 4th level, you get your General perk. And 6th level, you get your Grid Power. One thing that does not happen in this one that did happen in the Black Ranger role, you do not get extra attack at 5th level. We'll deal with that a little bit later, because it does exist. You just get it at a higher level for the Blue Ranger. All of those are effectively your skill-based things. Your general perks, your grid powers, and your Zord, and then Zord features are effectively just different flavors of feats that you can use to customize your character. And again, for the Blue Ranger, because they have such a high personal power pool, specifically when you're dealing with your grid powers, make sure, and I think there are some general perks that let you use power, but I think for the vast majority it's going to be grid powers. Look at things that are going to allow you to use your grid powers. You might even want to consider taking a form perk, which isn't defined in the core book, but later on they define, basically form perks are when you say it's morphing time, you can choose a particular form. They have a form perk, it's just not called that here, called the Ninja Rangers or something similar to that. It gives you Ninja Ranger powers. Those all require you to spend personal power when you morph to get that form. So again, the Blue Ranger can really benefit from having one form perk or multiple form perks, because their personal power regeneration is so high and their maximum is so high. It means that every time they morph, they can do something even more kind of unique to customize the character basically on the fly. And then again, for grid powers, just choosing stuff that's going to fit the role that you want to do is useful. So, yeah, moving on. At 9th level, you get Power Infusion. As a Blue Ranger, your connection to the grid's power is almost symbiotic. Once per scene, by spending one personal power and a free action while morphed, you and each of your morphed Ranger teammates within a certain distance re-roll natural ones on your next successful attack, and then at a higher level, they may also re-roll natural 2s. This one is worded really poorly. So Ranger teammates within a certain distance may re-roll natural 1s on your next successful attack. Well, in order for an attack to be successful, you can't roll a natural 1 on it. I mean, technically, you could roll natural 1s on the skill dice and be able to utilize this. But if you roll a natural 1 on your D20, that's a fumble. So in this, in particular, this is basically exclusively done for skill dice. And again, because it doesn't say you re-roll them and you have to take the next roll. This is another one where you can effectively use it to farm at least one critical hit. Because again, when you're rerolling natural ones, and then when you get to a high enough level, rerolling natural twos, that means on a d4, even if it's natural ones, that means you still have a 25% chance of rolling a crit if a d4 is involved in the roll. Which again is still 5 times higher than your standard tabletop RPG crit chance. So that's very, very useful. Again, even more useful when you have players with specializations. And then once you get the reroll natural twos, again, extremely useful for farming for crits. But again, because it says on your next successful attack, they have basically limited it to non-D20 rolls. So understand that Power Infusion, you still have to hit. You could even avoid rolling a nat 1, but roll low enough on your D20 that it's not a hit, and then this doesn't work. The nice thing about it is it's on your next successful attack. So if you miss, it doesn't mean that this goes away. It just means that the next time you do it, you can try for it. So yeah, again, this is another one where understanding your team is going to be essential for this to be most effective. But it's also not something that you have to dish out individually. This is just, I burn a personal power point as a free action, and everybody within a certain distance gets to reroll nat ones on their next successful attack. So kind of useful in very particular situations. Because it's already limited to once per scene, and it takes personal power and a free action to do, I would probably get rid of the successful attack, because the only benefit to rolling higher on your attack roll is making sure that you hit. So if you already hit, the only benefit to this is trying to fish for a critical hit. You're not really going to get a significantly better success just because you're rolling higher. He said, I don't think so. If I'm wrong about that, let me know in the comments down below. So yeah, this I would go as far as to say get rid of on your next successful attack and just go your next attack, get rid of the successful, and then this becomes a significantly better ability, because it effectively means you are crit fail proof on your next attack, and there's a really good chance that you're going to hit, because even if the d20 roll isn't high enough to hit, if one, especially if you're specialized, if one of your skill dice is a 1 or a 2 eventually, you can re-roll that, and as long as you keep getting those 1s or 2s, you can keep re-rolling it until it gets high enough that you have a roll that actually hits. So yeah, not the greatest ability, but it could be worse. Moving on. At 10th level, you get Power Burst. You can spend a standard action to have every morphed member of the Power Rangers team, no matter where they are on the grid in space and time, to gain 1d2 power. And then on reaching a certain level, this amount increases to 1d4 power. This is a really big deal, especially since this affects you as well. Once per scene, you burn a standard action to regain personal power points. And other than the once per scene aspect, there's no limit to how often you can do that. It's just every new scene, to get the most out of this ability, every new scene, the Blue Ranger should be doing a power burst. Because of this, having a Blue Ranger on your team can significantly increase everybody's ability to use grid powers. Again, a lot of people, you start off with only getting 2, or for the Blue Ranger, you only get 4 grid power per day for your natural regeneration. So unless you have a couple days between missions, which will happen, you're constantly really only ever going to have 4 grid power you can use per day. With Power Burst, that starts even if you're just rolling nat ones the entire time you use Power Burst. In a single adventure, you're probably having a minimum of between 4 and 10 scenes in a single 4-hour adventure, depending on how often combat happens. So that could mean you are getting 4 to 10 minimum grid power. Now, for Game Masters, this could be an ability that starts to become really, really overused. So you might want to tie it to, since there's literally nothing else in the Blue Ranger kit that actually uses it, you might want to tie your power bursts to your idea points. Because again, the only thing that uses idea points right now is Eureka. So tying something else to it would give you another reason to actually use them, and it would prevent this ability from just being used literally every time a new scene starts. The first thing the Blue Ranger does is, well, I use Power Burst. So yeah, this is another one where it's a little bit unbalanced, and you might want to homebrew something to actually make it matter when you're using Power Burst. And I think, again, the most logical thing is tie it to your idea points. Because it's not the craziest idea that the reason that you're getting the Power Burst is you have a great idea, and that will give everyone power. So, yeah. There's really not much more to talk about than that. So, moving on. At 11th level, you get extra attack. It's the exact same perk that you get for fifth level for the Black Ranger. And again, it only functions while morphed and fighting as an individual. It's interesting that the Blue Ranger can't get the extra attack until they hit level 11. But again, the Blue Ranger is not really designed to be a combat powerhouse. They are designed to be a little bit more of using their personal power to invoke different things and helping out the rest of the team and the things like that. And then, just because that's not really complicated, we're also going to talk about Blue Ranger Prime. So 20th level, you become the most advanced version possible of your team's Blue Ranger. Your morph form immediately gains the following benefits: +2 to all defenses, an additional point of damage on all attacks from powers, and an edge on social skill checks. So this is another one. Every single Ranger, their 20th level ability is always Color Ranger Prime. And it should emphasize the things that are most useful. For the Blue Ranger Prime, you get an edge on social skill checks, which at first I went, why would they do social when this is a smarts-based character? But then I remembered your Eureka gives you edge on smart skills. And so it might have just been that they're like, well, we don't want to completely belittle that. However, as I mentioned before, getting an additional edge gives you an upshift. So I still think this would have been significantly better to give an edge on smart skill checks instead of social skill checks, because social is the third highest essence score increase for this role. It's not something they really specialize in. So just giving edge on social skill checks, it made sense for the Black Ranger because they were a social focused class. Doesn't really make sense for the Blue Ranger. The rest of it is pretty standard. +2 to all defenses, additional point of damage on all attacks from powers. So again, it does incentivize the Blue Ranger to be using power-based attacks as opposed to making attacks with your weapon or things like that. So it means that even at maximum level, you are highly incentivized to make your grid power choices to be grid power choices that are going to give you some sort of ability that is useful to you. And in particular, you're going to want to have at least one of them that does damage, because with Blue Ranger Prime, it's going to do damage it's going to do additional damage. And you might want to specialize completely. I mean, the Blue Ranger effectively, because of how grid powers work, your Blue Ranger can kind of be considered an artificer style character. And if you lean really heavily into the grid powers, specifically grid powers that do damage, you're effectively building a wizard Power Ranger. Because your grid powers are kind of going to mimic how spells would work in other systems. And that's not to discount the magic system that they introduced in Finster's Monstermatic. There is magic that exists in the Power Rangers universe, but if you wanted to relate the Blue Ranger to something, a wizard class might make a lot of sense. And the additional point of damage on all attacks from powers would kind of emphasize that pretty well. So, moving on to final thoughts. Again, overall, the Blue Ranger is an interesting character. They are very much built for the idea of information is key, information is power. Quite a few of their grid tech abilities give you the ability to get more information. The various grid speak things, the X-Tech visor, Morphin Grid map suit. All of these things allow the Blue Ranger to know things and the rest of the team to learn things that they normally wouldn't be able to. Your Eureka ability in particular is very useful for ensuring that when you need to get the information that you need, you are getting it. In addition, your helping hand can be massively useful, and you can build the Blue Ranger effectively as a healer, taking grid powers, which is what they excel at, that allow you to heal your team, can be extremely useful. And then again, choosing your grid tech appropriately is really going to not only help you, but it's going to help the entire team. Depending on the grid tech perks that you choose, you are going to incentivize your team on how they attack, on how they interact with the world. And then again, as you get higher and higher, you start getting the ability to regain your personal power significantly more often. And then when the time you get to Blue Ranger Prime, you can effectively build a really powerful wizard style character just using grid power instead of magic power to do pretty amazing kind of damaging attacks. So pick your grid powers wisely. Otherwise, that is going to be all for me today. As always, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important in the comments down below. First, we always have to ask, who's your favorite Blue Ranger? Thinking of Blue Rangers, I'm a big fan of Preston. Preston from Ninja Steel. I really like Peter Sudartsu just as a person. And I thought Preston was a really, really interesting character. Also, Kai was an interesting Blue Ranger from Lost Galaxy. I thought he did some cool things. And then, I can't remember her name. What is the Blue Mystic Force Ranger's name? Blue Mystic Force Ranger. What's her name? Is it Madison. I adored Madison. Maddie was just such a cool character. I loved everything about her. I had a major crush on her. She's just a super cool character in general. So anyway, let me know your favorite Blue Ranger. And as far as the Blue Ranger role, for your grid powers, would you want to build a kind of wizard sorcerer style Ranger who's using their grid powers to effectively cast grid-based spells? Would you want to build them more along the lines of a healer and take advantage of that healing ability? Or would you want to go really hard into form perks and allow them to just, every time they morph, become a different flavor of Ranger? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it is all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.